Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon, or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode.
And I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes. But in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
And tonight's guest is not a crook either. His name is Paul Blake Smith. And Paul, if that name sounds familiar, was on this show previously to discuss his 2 books, President Eisenhower's Close Encounters and MO-41, The Bombshell Before Roswell. You may recall that Paul is the type of guy that if he has interest in a topic and he can't find a book on it, he writes the book himself. Well, he's done it again, this time with the alleged alien encounter that President Nixon took Jackie Gleason to. So listen in and decide for yourself.
Is it real? And are you?
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
We have brought back a favorite, Paul Blake Smith, an author who's so good he's got 3 names. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, last time we talked about President Eisenhower's Close Encounters and also MO-41, The Bombshell Before Roswell. You've since written another book, a new book, which is not out yet, but it will be out this spring, The Nixon-Gleason Alien Encounter. And that's kind of a nice follow-up to President Eisenhower's Close Encounters, because people may or may not remember that Nixon was his vice president, correct?
You are correct, sir. Yes. Nixon was a loyal vice president to Eisenhower for 8 years. And towards the end of Eisenhower's term, he was thought to be the whole future of the party. And he did run for president in 1960 and lost. Then he ran again in 68 and won. And by the fall of 72, he was really, really popular. He won in a landslide. And his poll numbers were way up because he was starting to bring the Vietnam War to a close. So he had this attitude, I can do anything I want now. I'm king of the mountain.
And he did, actually, as you capture in your book. He was very close friends with Jackie Gleason, who's best known for the bus driver Ralph Cramden on the Honeymooners, but also kind of a pool shark too, correct?
That's right. Jackie was a man of many talents, and he and Nixon went way back to, I think, the early 60s when Nixon would vacation in Key Biscayne, and Jackie lived nearby, and both of them had some free time on their hands. I know Nixon did after losing the election. So they golfed together, and they were two conservative people politically, and they both perspired excessively and liked to tipple a little bit, have a little drinky. And I'm sure with the obsession Jackie had with extraterrestrials, he was just gung-ho on the subject. He had to have badgered Nixon for what he knew quite repeatedly. And I don't think Nixon ever told him anything until February of 1973.
And that's quite a while. So Nixon, as the vice president to Eisenhower, was he privy to Eisenhower's close encounter?
I don't believe at first. And then as the years went by in the 1950s, I think Nixon was let in on the secret. Linda Moulton Howe has a source she called Cooper Stein, who was with the CIA, and a friend of mine who really researches things found out that Cooper Stein was a real deal. He really was with military and central intelligence, and he knew what he was talking about. And he said, I briefed Eisenhower and Nixon in D.C. at the same time on the status of UFOs and ETs and such in America. And Eisenhower took it quite well, but he said Nixon kind of sat there looking aghast, like, this is news to me.
Wow.
So they let him in. They let him in a little slowly as his vice presidency went by.
Yeah, that's two different type of people. I think of Eisenhower as like, you know, the war hero and kind of probably unflappable. Can you told us on our prior episode, but talk about Ike's first encounter with UFOs. It was on a ship, correct, during the war?
That's right. He was aboard the USS Franklin Roosevelt off the coast of Europe doing a military inspection for President Truman, January 1952. And according to one of the men who was there on the bridge of this ship in the middle of the night, Eisenhower came up, probably in a bathrobe, looking for a cup of coffee because they were in the midst of a pretty violent storm that was rocking the ship pretty good. It was a huge nuclear-powered ship, or not nuclear-powered. It had nuclear weapons on board. There is a difference. Well, as they were sitting around talking on the bridge, they looked out, and here's this silver round disc. The author of this article said it sat there for up to 15 minutes in the thunder and the lightning and the rain, totally unaffected. And they all just were astounded. And when it flitted away, Eisenhower said, well, you better keep the lid on this story, men, and I'll look into it and I'll get back to you. And the author of the story says, we never heard from Eisenhower again. So he wrote this for a New York City newspaper in the late 1990s. Obviously, he was getting on in years, and he didn't want the story to die out. And I've never heard any sort of denial from any of the Eisenhower camp or his presidential library. That could be a real example that Eisenhower was quite well broken in on the subject, you might say.
Yeah, so he wasn't president then, correct? He was in the military. And then when he became president, that's when the ice was broken. That's when he had the alien encounter. And he signed, was it the first of 3 treaties with the aliens?
He may have signed a treaty. Eisenhower decided to run for president shortly after that encounter. Now, whether that early 1952 sighting had anything to do with it, I don't know. But he reversed course 180 and said, yes, I am a candidate for president. He ran, won in a landslide. And within his first year in office, he went on a golfing vacation to Palm Springs. And on February 19th, 1954, on a Friday night, he snuck away from his Palm Springs vacation at night while the press was distracted by a party at their hotel. And Ike went over to Edwards Air Force Base, where some special guests had arrived at the airfield and were on a runway right near the edge of a hangar. And it's been alleged by one of the men who was at this encounter that Eisenhower was assured that this was safe. He never would have gone there without the go-ahead of his military officials. And there were 5 airships that landed. 3 were circular, 2 were elongated. And these human-like extraterrestrials, I call them like cousins of human beings. They looked a good deal like us, according to this eyewitness. He spoke out in early 1982, I think it was, and said, "This really happened. I was there. And I've learned that everyone from this incident has passed away, and I don't want this story to die out." So he told the story in the press, and he didn't give his name. He wanted to remain anonymous, and that's how it was reported. And I'll confess to this day, I'm not entirely certain who that Air Force test pilot was. He was apparently a very brave and knowledgeable man who was imported for his wisdom on aerodynamics and flight and such. So he said Eisenhower spoke English to these alien visitors, and they spoke English right back, and they were very friendly. And they asked Eisenhower, "Could you put a stop, please, to your atomic bomb testing program? You're polluting the air, the sea, into outer space. It's very dangerous what you're doing." And I think that would make a legitimate excuse for aliens to land and speak to the man in charge, don't you think?
Wow. Yeah, and those were the days when people could keep a secret, right?
And it remained a secret for decades. And it only got out because this one guy spoke up. And then little bits and pieces of the story from various angles started to leak out in the years after that. For example, one guy says, "I worked in the Pentagon and I saw these still photographs, and they were of Eisenhower meeting these alien beings in an airplane hangar at the edge of a runway." And another person said, "I was a sergeant at this Edwards Air Force Base, which is based out in the desert, and we were taking gunnery practice one afternoon when these 5 alien spaceships came down out of the sky, and our general, who was observing our maneuvers, ordered us to turn our guns on them." And he said, "We fired our artillery at the 5 landing airships, and it had no effect whatsoever." So they couldn't believe it. So the airships landed on a runway, and they were hustled out of there, he says. And he said, "I understand Eisenhower was called in, and that's some welcoming committee, isn't it?" You tried to kill him when they arrived.
Yeah, really. Oh my God.
So
We'll let people.
To us at all.
So we will let people go back to that prior episode with you, which I'll put in the show notes. But let's fast forward. Those aliens that President Eisenhower met were human-like, nothing like what President Nixon showed Jackie Gleason in his encounter. But let's go back and let's talk a little bit about Jackie Gleason. And people may not know his UFO fetish. You know, he had a tremendous library. He had a house built in Westchester County that looked like a UFO, was kind of an homage. He called it the mothership. Talk a little bit about Jackie Gleason and his, UFO fetish, and why do you think he was so? Did he have an experience when he was a kid, or why do you think he was so obsessed with it?
I don't know. That's a very good question. In the 1950s, he talked to TV Guide magazine and said, "I've never seen a UFO." And then in the early 70s, he gave an interview and said, "I finally saw some on a beach while walking in Miami." So in early 54, around the same time Eisenhower met with these creatures or beings at the airport, Jackie had this sudden desire to have a round spaceship house, and he found some property about 30, 40 miles outside of New York City where Jackie lived and worked on TV. And he had custom built a round spaceship house, and he had it, here's a really weird part, he had the designer who put everything together manufacture some of it in an airplane hangar, and it had to be especially shipped from there. Now, what does this remind you of? Did Jackie get tipped off to the alien encounter by Eisenhower and wanted the same exact thing? He was that crazy about UFOs. He would call up UFO book authors and quiz them intensely, and then he would call up the subjects of the UFO books and sightings, and he would talk to these people, and he wanted every single detail. And he amassed over 1,700 books and periodicals on the paranormal, mostly on spaceships. You can find that collection still to this day at the University of Miami in their special library reading room. But it really goes to prove Jackie was obsessed like no one else in this country. Now, I found out in my research that President Eisenhower had a national security advisor he met with the day before he left for Palm Springs and the day after he got back from Palm Springs, and his name was Everett Gleason, born in Brooklyn. Now, guess where Jackie was born? About 10 years apart.
Wow.
Surely this Everett Gleason didn't break national security standards to tell UFO obsessed Jackie, but it sure kind of fits together, doesn't it?
Yeah. I was going to ask you if Jackie Gleason knew President Eisenhower, but I guess this is another couple degrees of Kevin Bacon to that connection.
Well, Jackie went golfing with lots of big shots, including Nixon and Bob Hope. And I'm sure that someone as golf obsessed as President Eisenhower, they could have golfed together as, remember, just before Eisenhower ran for president, he was the president of Columbia University in New York City, where Jackie was a huge star on TV with his honeymooners. And I just love that one episode where the honeymooners are going to a costume party and Ralph puts together his own costume and declares, "I am the man from space." He literally tried to become an alien on his own TV show.
That's great. That's excellent. So it was his wife that spilled the beans on this. So she's the one that shared what happened. Where did she share this, and what is the story from her perspective?
Okay, in 1974, Beverly Gleason made a few comments in an interview on her husband's interest in the paranormal. And she mentioned, well, Jackie told me once that he went to a airfield and saw aliens with President Nixon. Well, Jackie blew up when he read this in the press and said, "Don't ever speak of this again. I told you that in strict confidence one night in February of 73. So in 1983, now ex-wife Beverly Gleason decided to write her own article for the Inquirer to help promote a tell-all book she was going to put together. And she wrote somewhat extensively a one-page article that Jackie came home one night in 1973 and said, "I've just seen the bodies of dead aliens. President Nixon showed them to me at Homestead Air Force Base." She said he came home one night ashen, shaken, really just deeply affected, like he'd just been through a traumatic experience. And she asked him, "Where have you been?" So he told her the whole story. He blurted it out, even though apparently he'd been sworn to secrecy that night at the airbase, but he did let slip. So she thought, this is an incredible story. I'm going to write about it and cash in and get paid by the Inquirer. Well, Jackie read the article, and again he exploded with rage and said, "You're never to speak to this. I don't want to ever hear it again." So she put the kibosh on her book. He refused comment from all the press that inundated him with phone calls and interviews and asked, "What about this spaceship story?" He could have easily squashed it, and said, "Oh, there's nothing to this. My wife was lying. She made this up." But he never did. He just said, "I have no comment." And that's the way he took it to his grave in June of 1987.
So how did his trip unwind that day? Was he picked up by a helicopter and flown out, or did President Nixon pick him up, or what was the rough events of that day?
There's an urban legend that's a complete falsehood that Nixon dodged his Secret Service guards, got past 2 checkpoints at his Key Biscayne estate, and drove all the way in the dark across Miami to Jackie's house. That's nonsense. Never happened. However, earlier that afternoon on national TV, Nixon flew to Jackie's golf course home and landed on a helipad right nearby in Lauderhill, Florida, where Jackie was having the Inverary golf tournament. And Nixon got out, and Jackie raced up to his helicopter and greeted him. And they got into Jackie's golf cart, and Jackie drove him around, and they chatted. And Nixon got out and spoke to the press, made a few announcements about giving money to charity, and then wrapping up the Vietnam War. He and Jackie spoke a little longer. Bob Hope was around at that time, and Gordon Cooper, a big UFO fan, and a bunch of celebrities. It was Celebrity Golf Day on that Monday, February 19th. That date sound familiar to you? And then it was that night that Jackie came home all upset that he'd finally seen what he'd been wanting to see his whole life, real hard proof.
Now, the aliens that he saw were like 3 feet with pointy ears. And I've never seen like aliens described with pointy ears before. Maybe I probably don't have the library that he has. Do you know if was he disappointed? Was he expecting like the ones that Eisenhower saw, like the humanoid or like the Greys, or any reaction on what he saw, and what are your thoughts about that race of alien that he saw versus the ones that Eisenhower met with?
It's a good question. Beverly Gleason gave one final interview. She doesn't really want to talk about this subject. I could not find her, and even if I could today, I doubt if she'd talk to anyone. She's refused all interviews and book requests to, write a tell-all. But she said in 2003, for the third time, Jackie said they were about 2 or 3 feet tall at most. They looked like they'd been embalmed, and they had big eyes and big pointy ears. And if you go back to a somewhat famous case, the Hopkinsville, Kentucky farm family of 1955, that said they were assaulted by a group of extraterrestrial beings of that same exact description with pointy ears, same height, same look. And I'm thinking, well, there were no fatalities in that incident, but that might be an indication of one of the different races that is coming here and checking us out, and maybe they had an accident of some sort. But Jackie said there were 4 dead bodies at Homestead Air Force Base in a special laboratory stretched out on these examining tables, and he saw them up close. I don't know if he touched them. I doubt if he was allowed to, but knowing Jackie wanting to make sure this is the hard proof at last, I think he got awfully close up and stared, got himself quite an eyeful. And I bet that sight lasted for the rest of his life. It turns out Jackie has a photographic memory, and that's how he could do the Honeymooners and other TV shows without rehearsing. It's legendary that Gleason hated to rehearse. He would just come in, and he seemed to know the whole script on the day of the shoot. And that's how, because he would read it once, and then he had it locked into his brain visually, and he knew what to do, and he went from there. So I bet those aliens that he saw close up haunted him for the rest of his life.
Now, in your research, did anybody else? I mean, Nixon was close to his wife, Pat Nixon. Was there any other family members that ever made a reference to this, or was it just Jackie Gleason's ex-wife?
I don't think Nixon uttered a peep. I think it was Jackie's ex-wife. I doubt if he told his next wife. He was married 3 times. Beverly was the second wife. It's possible someone contacted Marilyn Taylor Gleason shortly before her demise a few years ago, and she said, I can't help you with this. Now, she didn't deny that she knew all about it, She just said, intriguingly, I can't help you with it. Like she's not going to help you, or she knows nothing. It was never clear, but nice try. Jackie may have told his daughters, but I doubt it. I think he was a Freemason, and he was accustomed to keeping secrets. And this was something he really wasn't supposed to let out governmentally and Masonically.
There's a story, and I heard on another podcast, it seems like Nixon knew more than most presidents, Eisenhower, Nixon. I don't know if Johnson did. I mean, what's your thought on Johnson? Did he know a lot? Did he signed the treaty too, right? Like every 10 years would be a treaty up through Nixon?
Right. I looked it up in LBJ's digitized presidential records. Eisenhower was in Palm Springs for the secret meeting on February 19th, 1954. So guess who went flying out to Palm Springs and met with Eisenhower February 19th, 1964. Actually, Johnson spoke with Eisenhower in the White House Oval Office that day, and then he flew out the next day and met with Eisenhower a couple of times, and there were some gaps in his schedule. And it's been alleged by a man who worked at Edwards Air Force Base that they've had a crashed alien ship there, or it was gifted, one or the other. His name was Edward Laverne Moraine, and he said that some actual face-to-face contact with a living alien being, at least one, maybe more, took place in 1964. And I'm wondering, did LBJ fly out there along with Eisenhower and have his own encounter, 10 years later? Was there an agreement that needed to be updated? Is that what Eisenhower put together, like a 10-year agreement? And then Johnson renewed it. And on February 19, 1973, that would have been the 19th anniversary. I looked up Nixon's records for February of 1974, the 20th anniversary. And what do you know? Many documents are missing. Nixon's itinerary for that period around the 18th of February is just really poorly kept, like only one or two notations, unlike all of his other records. Something funny was going on. And then he flew back and was back in the White House as of February 19, 1974. So, I can't believe all of these dates that land on mid-February and the 19th are just coincidental. Can you?
Was he the last president to sign it? And if he was that because Eisenhower may have died before when other presidents came in office, and he was kind of like the spokesman?
I don't know if it was a 20-year agreement or what the situation was after Eisenhower died. But Ike did meet with Gerald Ford. I've seen a picture of that. He met with Ronald Reagan, these two, before they became president. He met with Johnson a couple of times, and even February 19th, 1968, another date that shall live in infamy. They went golfing together and were in Palm Springs, Ike and Johnson. That would have been, the 14th, I guess, anniversary. So why do they keep meeting around the 19th of February? And Eisenhower had to be involved, and it's just very strange. I don't think that Ford really knew anything. He did come to Miami and play in Jackie's golf tournament in 1975. But according to the records, he played like 18 holes, Mr. Ford, and then he got back in his Air Force One and flew back to Washington. So I doubt if there was any alien hanky-panky on that trip.
What's your thought about what was in the treaty? I know you probably don't have any hardcore written records. Have you talked to anybody, any gossip, any juice about what might have been in those treaties, what the agreement was?
According to the Air Force test pilot who was present at the 54 meeting, Eisenhower wanted assurances that you guys aren't going to show yourselves overtly, are you? You're not going to land and try to speak to people, are you? Because we're afraid this will just start a panic. There'd be social disorder. So I think that was his end of things. There's a 2017 leaked document from 1989, a Defense Intelligence Agency document. I think it's real. I've talked to others who say they think it's real. And it mentions in there Eisenhower did meet with aliens, and he came to an agreement where he would allow them to land at an air base in remote Nevada and do a little scientific experimenting, and we would provide some material for them, hopefully not human beings. But and in exchange, they would agree to keep themselves relatively obscure, that you might see them flitting by in the sky. There's one aspect of this that I'm unclear on, and there's a rumor that Eisenhower agreed to let the aliens pick up and look over human beings and then put them back. They had to keep a list of names of who they took for abduction, if you want to call it that, and put them back where they found them in rural settings out in the country where it wouldn't draw attention. And some people think that this treaty clause was broken, or that other races came in and decided to take advantage of this, and that's why you see like these evil grays that take human beings or Americans and abduct them heartlessly and probe them and put them back with very vague memories of what happened.
Well, there's even like the hybridization, Paul. You're like, creating a hybrid species with humans. So
yeah,
I don't know. What's your thought? Why would aliens have interest? Would they have interest in a hybrid species? Would they have interest in a natural resource like gold or whatever? What would be their interest here? Any thoughts?
Well, when you or I walk down the street or walk through a mall, we might meet very friendly people and some cold-hearted people who are just downright mean and ugly. And it may be the same with alien races coming here, that some are very friendly and trustworthy and warm and kind, and others not so friendly. The ones that might just take us, probe us, treat us like a piece of meat, or even extract sperm or ovum and create a hybrid race. There's probably, I've read, where like maybe a dozen or more races coming here. So one kind of cold-hearted race may well be undertaking these scientific experiments. I hope it's not true, but there's not much we can do to stop them, is there?
What do you think makes Earth like a destination for aliens that these different races want to come here and observe and mess around with us? What do you think makes it so? Any thoughts? What makes this place so good?
Our technology's just exploded. We used to be living in log cabins like 150 years ago. Now
Right.
look at us. We're utterly fascinating. All our different societies and cultures and language, plants and animals. It's like a scientist here in America would get in an airplane and fly to Africa and study the jungle or a swamp, take his readings, take some samples, maybe take a few animals and bring them back to his lab and make a report. And that could be just what some alien races are doing, only it's just much longer distance, traveling perhaps interdimensionally on beams of light or through wormholes or whatever advanced process they have, instead of, like on Star Trek, where this takes dozens of years just to go through a galaxy. They could be here in like the blink of an eye. And so the mind just boggles at all the possibilities. But I think we are fascinating. And who knows, maybe these are like teenage kids putting together a science report for high school on their planet. Any of them could be here messing around and have an accident. They don't know our electromagnetic atmosphere, our gravitational forces, our thunderstorms and, strong winds. They're from another world and they're not used to that. So they've had a few accidents. I find that quite plausible because we somehow almost childishly expect alien visitors to be perfect and never have any flaws and never make mistakes. And I think that's not very reasonable.
And doing this book, writing this book, the Nixon Gleason Alien Encounter, was there a big aha, a big surprise that you got out of it? And what was in something unanswered that you wished you had gotten?
I had a few mild surprises, and one of them was another famous name. I have no idea if he was present, but I'd be willing to wager a little money that comedian Bob Hope also went along to Homestead Air Force Base.
Okay.
Did you know what he did in 1973 when he got home?
No.
He custom designed his own UFO house on the edge of a cliff in Palm Springs, and you can see it to this day. It's on the internet. Bob Hope's spaceship house.
He did too, really? Because Gleason did it in Westchester County, and it's like over like a ledge, and he would have parties there. And so, is Nixon's kind of the same design, or is it certain?
No. Bob Hope had a custom design.
Bob Hope. I'm sorry. Yeah. Is Bob Hope's the same?
Bob Hope had several homes in Los Angeles and Palm Springs. So what is he custom designing? Something he built, and he had specifically creating a kind of round spaceship with a hole at the top and little round buildings around it, almost exactly like what Jackie did. Huh. Now, why would Nixon show Jackie Gleason this alien evidence? In early 73, Nixon's Watergate henchmen were caught in a vice. They'd been arrested, and they were running up huge legal fees, and they had lost their jobs, and they needed money. And Nixon knew it, and he speaks on the Oval Office tapes of wanting hush money. And, oh, my gosh, where are we going to get this darn hush money, he says in January of 73. Then a few weeks after the Gleason encounter, Nixon's very calm about the hush money. He says, oh, I know where we can get our hands on that. Don't you worry about that at all. So Jackie was extremely wealthy, and so was Bob Hope. They were like the two wealthiest men in showbiz. Did Nixon, hold them up for a little campaign contribution or a little hush money contribution under the table in exchange for showing him this? Nixon was known to be very crafty, very politically cunning, and he needed the money pretty bad. So I think Hope and Gleason, who were there that day on Monday, February 19th at the golf tournament, they were partnered together. It makes perfect sense. And why Bob Hope went home and shortly thereafter custom designed his own spaceship house, much like Gleason's in 54.
Yeah, and you had mentioned, I've heard you on other shows, you had mentioned that Gleason was willing to put out a $500,000 bounty for proof, and then it went to $1 million, and then that's when Nixon took him up on it, correct?
That's my theory, yeah. It's a fact that Jackie would go on the long John Nebel paranormal show, a radio show in the middle of the night in New York City. When he couldn't sleep, he would call in sometimes he would be the guest. And he was so serious, he says, I'm going to offer like $50,000 for anyone who can show me hard, solid proof of alien visitation here on planet Earth. Then he pumped it up a few years later to $500,000. And since he made up to $14 million a year in TV, movies, and personal appearances and record albums, this was just nothing to Jackie. He decided to say $1 million to anyone who can show me the proof. And I think Nixon went for it.
Mm. And what was one thing in the book that you were researching that you wished you got that you didn't get? Is there anything that you're still hunting for?
When the book was finished, I talked to a secret source of mine. And he said, I'm a little skeptical on the Nixon encounter. Let me check with my contacts in the military and intelligence people. And they came back to him and said, your guy's book is quite real. It really happened.
Well, good for you.
And that Nixon forged new agreements with alien visitors at Homestead Air Force Base. And so I'm going to try to get this into the book, even though it's locked in for printing very soon. And I don't know if I'll be able to get that in, but that surprised me. That not only did Nixon show Jackie the evidence that he may have been up to other things on February 19th, 1973 at Homestead.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And what happened after that? Is there, after Nixon, you said probably Ford and I'm sure Jimmy Carter was briefed on it. And again, I heard on another episode which I really enjoyed with you, and I think the Supernatural Girl or whatever, there was a story of Jimmy Carter who's very religious, being debriefed, then going into his office and crying for an hour. Have you heard that?
That might be true. I don't know. Carter had a UFO sighting in 1969. Some people thought it was in October. An author named Kevin Randall did a good job of pinning this down in Leary, Georgia, that Carter was there in January of 69. He filed a report in 1974 that you can still read on the internet and said during his campaign for president, I've seen a UFO and I'm going to make all files on UFOs open to the public because I've seen one and I know you want the truth. And as soon as he got to be president, he did look into it and was told, keep your mouth shut about this. It's top national security. I think they told him next to nothing, basically. And to that day and forward, Carter clammed up and he doesn't want to talk about it.
Now he's in a hospice. I don't know if he's passed yet, but I mean, he's probably close to it. It'd be interesting if on his deathbed, if he left some great thing he didn't want to take with him. That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
That sure would, like issuing a statement, or making a video for the American people. But would the people around him squelch that? Would they, grab that and cover it up? So you never know.
Now, in writing all these great books, have you ever been threatened, or someone tried to silence you, or threatened to sue you or anything, or have you been pretty much left alone? Because you wrote all these books because you couldn't find anything on the topic, and you went out and wrote the book yourself.
No one's threatened me. I've been told by a source that the government is very, very slowly disclosing and bracing people up for this information that we are being visited, and that, Paul, your books are being allowed, is the way they put it. So I'm not officially part of the program of disclosure, but it's like I got a little piece of the action in a minor way because I'm a little nobody. And I've never seen a UFO. I have no encounters of my own. People come up to me and tell me their stories all the time. I'm a little jealous, but that's life.
We interrupt this program for a UFFO announcement. A unique film funding opportunity.
In the town of Cape May, New Jersey, Jane, Francis, and Camille are three best friends living in the same apartment complex. But when their landlord, a mean girl nemesis, threatens to raise their rent, they know they must take action. Desperate to save their home, the trio hatches a plan. They will teach themselves how to play pickleball. Thus, their friendship and determination are put to the ultimate test in a tournament that will save their home.
Pickleball to me is community, and the people that I've met on this journey have been amazing. How can you help? Share it with people who love pickleball. Share it with people who hate pickleball. Share it with people who don't know a thing about pickleball. Anything you can give will really be appreciated and used. We really appreciate your support, and nothing you can give is too little. Pickleball is life. Deal with it.
And now, back to our regularly scheduled program. But remember, if you want to contribute, go to seedandspark.com and search for Pickleball is Life. That's seedandspark.com. Search for Pickleball is Life.
Yeah, I just recently, I don't know if you ever listened to the podcast, but I think an episode or two ago, I had a person who does hypnotherapy. And she actually, her family was in show business. Her father, was a writer and producer for all the famous things, the Jeffersons, All in the Family, MASH, all those, involved in all those shows. And she was involved in show business for a while. She became a hypnotherapist. And one of her clients was this guy that had this amazing alien abduction experience that they also have a book about. And that was just a crazy, interesting episode. And I tend to take all my guests, let them tell their story. And I like them. I find most of my guests, because I vet them pretty carefully, pretty credible in my mind, So there's a lot of that going around, the alien thing.
Yeah, there was a woman that lived across the hall from me in my apartment, said when she was in her mid-90s, I was quite surprised, church-going Christian little old lady, said that I like your books, Paul, and I want to tell you a little story. When I was a little girl growing up on a farm in Alabama, my father and I stood there and looked in the distance, and there was a landed circular spaceship. And I wanted to go forward and rush right up to it. My dad held me back and said, no, just leave them be. Let them do what they got to do. And eventually the ship just zipped away. And I'm thinking, if she could have an encounter, how come I can't?
Yeah.
Hers was 75, 80 years ago, but she swore, and she was not the kind at all to make things up. I get that kind of tale told to me now and then. Somebody said here where I live in Missouri, one went down the street when he was a kid riding a bike, and all the neighbors just stopped and stared in awe. They could barely believe it. It was a pretty good-sized ship in the middle of the day. Dogs stopped barking, and it just flitted on, out of sight. And they almost as if they want to be seen now and then, and letting you know that, we're here and we're observing. There's nothing much we can do about it. I think we should take it calmly. You're not supposed to quit your job or quit your religion or quit your family. You should just accept that we're probably being monitored and observed. And right now, they're not going to land and speak to us. So there's nothing you can do but go about your business.
You may not have seen a UFO, but you grew up in a place that's very famous, which you actually documented in a book, MO41, MO41, the bombshell before Roswell. Talk about that and kind of where you're from, where there's a very famous incident that happened before Roswell.
Right. Around the year 2000, I started hearing this story, 99, 2000, that a spaceship crashed in my own hometown. And I thought, what?
Yeah.
Well, I'll look into this. And I kept waiting for a book to come out. And I thought, I'm waiting. And I finally got fed up. And I thought, I'll research this and I'll write it myself. And the book came out just fine and did quite well. I'm kind of repolishing it up for a new publisher now that my old publisher is starting to fold up the tent and getting little bits and pieces of the story. But here it is. A spaceship crash landed on a farm field and produced a fireball and a scattered fire in this field. And it was called into the local fire department, and they sent out the cops, the fire department, the sheriff's department. They all thought at first an airplane has crashed.
And where was this, Paul? What was that town that you grew up in, your hometown, where this happened?
Cape Girardeau, Missouri.
There you go.
Where my grandfather was a judge at the time of the accident.
And Rush Limbaugh was from, right? Was Rush Limbaugh from there?
That's right. The Rush Limbaugh family. Rush the first was a friend of my grandfather's. Rush the second was a friend of my father. Rush the third, the famous broadcaster, was my Little League umpire when I was pitching on the mound in Cape Girardeau when I was 10 years old. I've never met him as an adult, and I was hoping before he passed away he might release a statement on what he knew. Somebody called into his radio show, I think 2006 was it, and said, Rush, what's up with this spaceship crash in your own hometown? And he calmly said, there's more to this story than you might think. And he went on to the next caller. He didn't want to talk about it, but he didn't dismiss it and say, oh, that's a bunch of junk. Get out of here with this nonsense. He didn't say that at all. And I've heard that Rush was told when he was in high school. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I was not told in high school, but my stepmother said I heard it in the 1960s when I was in high school in Cape Girardeau, that these 3 alien beings were pulled out of a circular craft that crashed in this farm field. It was not an airplane at all. People found when they got to the site, and they were big-headed with big black eyes. They were identical, as if punched out of a mold. 2 were pretty dead upon impact, and the 3rd died shortly thereafter. And then the military came in and said, put that down, put that debris, no souvenirs, no pictures. This is a matter of national security. This never happened, and you're never to discuss it again. And some people took that seriously and others not so much.
And these aliens, they're different as well. Were they taller than 3 foot? I mean, they didn't have pointy ears, I think you said. They're more like grays, I guess. Or what color were they? Could you be a little more descriptive on what they look like?
Yeah, your typical gray, sort of silvery gray, possibly with a crinkly, wrinkly flight suit.
Yeah.
Or that's how their skin reacted to our oxygen-rich atmosphere.
Uh-huh.
And they had the little slit for a mouth and 2 dots for nostrils, no ears apparently, or at least none seemingly visible. Yeah. So this was, again, a different race than the Eisenhower ones, and from the Jackie Gleason encounter in Homestead Air Force Base.
Yeah, so I wonder why. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I wonder why the aliens that Gleason saw had ears, because aliens are supposed to be telepathic, you know. they don't. So
why do some have no ears at all, and why do others have big pointy ears? I don't know. It might be
that's your next book.
Yeah, that might be the conditions on the planet they're from, how we grow and evolve human beings, growing hair, and the ones at the Eisenhower encounter were described as having only just slight little fuzz on top of their heads. Otherwise, they didn't have hair, and they had a slightly different skin tone than we did. And so this is very different from Cape Girardeau and very different from Homestead Air Force Base.
So I know you don't know the exact date when this book is coming out, the Nixon-Gleason alien encounter. Can they pre-order it anywhere, or should they just check back in, or where can they follow you if they want to get this book as soon as it's available?
Yeah, probably check back in about a month. It should be available in May is what they're shooting for. I wish I had a more definite date, but in the month of May, I'll try to put as much word out as I can. I hope folks will enjoy it. It will be from foundationsbooks.net and from Amazon, and it'll be in all kinds of ebook form, and we're hopeful of a audio book deal. You can get the Eisenhower one from Tantor.com on audiobook. They did a terrific job with the book cover and the book narration. And I know some people would prefer not to read or cannot read, but they can listen to the story. And it was very well done. So that's at Tantor.com for that. I look forward to hopefully getting a deal done for the Nixon book likewise.
And I know on the docket, you have a book on Marilyn Monroe. We talked about some stuff off the air about that. That is on hold, additional research going on that, so look forward to that. So in the interim, they can certainly go either on Audible or to Amazon and buy several of your books, President Eisenhower's Close Encounters. Is it Mo or Mo 41? What's the correct way to pronounce that?
I always say Mo 41.
Mo 41.
Either is good for me.
Okay.
It just means Missouri 1941, trying to indicate this is 6 years before the New Mexico crash of Roswell, which seems to get all the limelight. I have a hard time getting Hollywood to sit up and pay attention that we had a story just as good, I tell you, 6 years before Roswell. And I think President Roosevelt knew about it and made references into some leaked memos that mention the celestial wonders that have come to us. And he mentions the new Non-Terrestrial Science and Technology Committee. Gee, what could that have been about in 1941 and 42? There's also a document from Roswell from General Nathan Twining, who put together a report for President Truman. And in this report, the White Hot Intelligence Report is what it's nicknamed. They referenced the Missouri discovery of 1941. Gee, I wonder what that could have been.
Well, you never know, Paul. The Shock Docs, the documentary series on different paranormal things, who knows? Maybe they'll reach out to you on some of these books that you've strung together.
Well, my agent and I are quite open, and we're listening.
All right. I hope they do. What's next? I mean, I know you've we mentioned the Marilyn Monroe book. Is there anything else UFO related or non-UFO related that you have an interest in writing about, since you can't find the book out there?
Have you ever heard of a conservative author from years ago who's since passed away named Ruth Montgomery?
No.
She had a series of best-selling books of automatic writing from messages from the spirit world.
Wow.
There were so many predictions in there. Many came true and have come true, and I put together a compendium of how astonishingly accurate this stuff is for our day and time right now. So that's pretty much finished, and that's on hold for these other books, but I'll get them all out someday. And as I've mentioned, I'm taking my first 2 books on the Cape Girardeau UFO crash of 1941, and I'm putting them together into one really solid new book that will have some new little bits and pieces of data. And if anyone has any new information or would like to leak something, just contact me on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn. You can find me there on various pages.
And last thing, that book I find very intriguing, the one you said. What was his name again? Montgomery, what was the first name?
Ruth Montgomery and her spirit guides from books of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And they've said, we are being visited. Extraterrestrials are coming here. Our government knows more than they're telling. They're quite fascinated by our race and our planet, and they are studying us. It's just like we suspect now. And they said this long before it was hip in today's world, like 40, 50 years ago.
By any chance, was she a spiritualist? Like, I've been to Lilydale in New York. I did a couple of shows there. That's a great place to go to in upstate New York. Do you know, was she a spiritualist, or how did she get discovered? I guess you're writing the book, you'll tell us, but just a tease.
Yeah. Ruth was a conservative newspaper columnist and reporter and was friends with President Eisenhower.
Wow. My God.
Yeah, and she wrote a daily newspaper column and was on Meet the Press and was a solid citizen. She went undercover to a seance-type atmosphere, a spiritualist camp in Florida. And she expected to reveal, expose them as frauds, and found, oh my gosh, this information is real that they're passing along to me. And she said, one of the spiritualists said, you have the gift to be able to channel the spirits from the astral plane yourself. Why don't you give it a try through astral writing or automatic writing? And she did, and these messages started piling up, and they're amazing. They're very noble and uplifting and spiritual. And they were a series of best-selling books in the 1960s, 70s, and she stopped around 1985. She came back with one final book in 1999, and then she passed away in 2001. I used to correspond with her back and forth before she passed away. So I thought, well, no one's writing about her and all these amazing predictions, and I have corralled a relative of hers, and she wrote the foreword to this book, and it's just about all set.
Well, I look forward to that one too, man. Like, give me a ring when that one's out. All right, Paul, we're up against our time now. Right now, but that was a phenomenal interview. You've written another great book. Can't wait till that becomes available in May. The Nixon Gleason Alien Encounter, and it's great to hear you have a couple other books up your sleeve. So keep writing, and thank you for visiting us again on the Afraid of Nothing podcast.
Well, I've been happy to speak to you, and I'm sure we'll meet again further down the trail someday.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared. Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit afraidofnothingpodcast.com. to peruse all the shows. That's afraidofnothingpodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.